Chapter 531. Orissa was not sure what he was talking about. Boss. Tim nodded. Quick, call him back, otherwise, your boss will be mad at you. Orissa glanced at him before taking over the phone. Orissa could not help but chuckle after seeing the name on the phone. She then pulled Tim over to the bed, carried him in her arms, and explained in a serious voice, "This boss is your daddy, so don't worry." Tim froze for a moment. What, Mr. Graham? Orissa grinned and explained further, "I work in your daddy's company, so technically, he's my boss too." Tim nodded in response. "Come, sweetheart, it's time to sleep." After getting the boy to lie in bed, she lay beside him and tucked him in. Tim snuck a glance at her, wanting to remind her to call back. But before he could open his mouth, Orissa's phone rang. It was a call from Benjamin. Orissa answered the call and put it in speaker mode. "What? Why didn't you pick up my call earlier?" the man questioned her. Orissa rolled her eyes. "I was in the washroom and left my phone elsewhere." "What do you want?" Benjamin kept mum for a moment before continuing, "Is Tim asleep?" "He's about to sleep soon." Orissa turned around to look at Tim, whose eyes were still wide open, and smiled at him. "How about Gavin and the rest?" "They just fell asleep," Benjamin responded with a gentle grunt. "All right, you should sleep early too. Sean will take care of Mary." "Oh, you have a good rest too. Bye." Orissa then ended the call without hesitation. Benjamin knitted his brows and was bewildered by her response. Why is she so eager to end the call? Orissa put away her phone and started coaxing Tim to sleep. "Would you like to listen to a bedtime story?" Tim looked at her and shook his head. "It's all right, Miss York. You should sleep early too." The little guy then shut his eyes. Orissa could not help but sigh in secret. How she wished she could make up to Tim by showering him with motherly love, but it seemed he was trying to maintain a distance from him. She was unsure if Tim did this because he was uncomfortable having a family member around him or if he still bore a grudge against her. Orissa gently stroked his cheek, leaned forward and gave him a peck on his forehead. Unlike the other children, Tim gave out a more down-to-earth vibe. Once again, Orissa leaned forth and kissed him on his cheek. She then refrained from doing it again when she realized how stiff the boy's body was. "Sleep tight, sweetheart." She gently patted Tim's back and coaxed him. Minutes later, she fell into a deep slumber. Yet, the boy was still awake. Tim felt a little uneasy as he was not used to being embraced in such a manner. He opened his eyes to check on Orissa. When he realized she had fallen asleep, he mustered up the courage to study her face closely. Upon noticing how tired she was, Tim pressed his lips. Miss York must be exhausted since she woke up at 4 o'clock in the morning. He felt like stroking Orissa's face but was afraid of waking her up. He then retracted his hands and decided to let her rest. Tim blushed in an instant when he took a whiff of Orissa's fragrance. That's what a mommy's hug feels like. It's so nice and warm. Tim looked at Orissa, and his lips curled into a smile. Tim gradually fell asleep as he listened to Orissa's steady breathing. Meanwhile, Orissa had a nightmare. She dreamt that Tim held grudges against her and refused to return home with her. "I'm sorry, sweetheart. It's all mommy's fault. You had a rough childhood all because of me. I'm sorry. I'm sorry." Orissa burst into tears as she was overwhelmed with guilt. Tim woke up from his sleep when he heard her cry. "I'm sorry, Tim. Please forgive mommy. Please forgive mommy." Tears rolled down Orissa's cheeks. She hugged the little boy even more tightly because she was afraid he might run away. Tim's heart skipped a beat when he heard she was calling his name in her dream. Chapter 532. Tim was unsure what to do when Orissa unexpectedly wept in her sleep. The little boy wiped the tears off her cheeks as he had no idea how to console her. He also patted her back gently like how she did to him earlier. "Don't cry, Miss York. Miss York, please don't cry." Tim repeated the same line over and again because he had never comforted anyone before. Orissa eventually calmed down and stopped crying when she felt the child was next to her. "I love you, sweetheart." After mumbling a few sentences, she fell asleep once again. Tim whispered with blushed cheeks, "I like you too." After making sure Orissa was out like a light, the little boy carefully crawled out of her arms and covered her in a blanket. He then washed his face and went to the ward next door. He noticed Mary had fallen asleep even though she was still on an IV drip. Sean, who was supposed to accompany Mary, was sleeping like a log on the couch. Tim sat by the bed and gently stroked the back of her hand with a catheter. Mary woke up and was surprised to see the boy sitting next to her. "Tim, what are you doing here? Shouldn't you be taking your nap?" "I've taken my nap, Grandma," Tim answered steadily. He was not used to taking naps since he had to work during the day, but having Marissa by his side, he managed to sleep for nearly 30 minutes. "Come closer." Mary adjusted her position on the bed and gestured for Tim to sit closer. "No, Grandma, I'm scared of knocking over the needle. Come on, get up here now. I want to talk to you." Mary looked at him and called him over. Tim crawled up, lay next to Mary, and hugged her. Mary smiled and embraced the little boy. "Tim, Miss York is your mommy, and she's the woman who gave birth to you. You mustn't blame her for dumping you. You have to understand that she didn't do it on purpose." Mary lowered her eyes to look at the child in her arms. Though she was a little surprised to see how calm he was, she decided to explain to him what had happened. Mary explained, "You see, someone sabotaged your mom, and there was nothing she could do back then. The woman, who wanted to marry your dad, locked your mom up because she wanted to snatch the baby after she had given birth. Your mom eventually gave birth to 6 babies. That woman decided to take the first 2 babies away, and that was you and Gavin. She decided to dump you when she realized you were ill and believed you might not make it. That was why she only brought Gavin to your dad," she added. Mary continued, "Your mom and the remaining 4 children had a rough time, too, as that woman was trying to kill them. Your mom sustained a severe head injury, so that was why she couldn't remember how many babies she had delivered. Mr. Frank told me when your mom first learned about you, she suffered an emotional breakdown and was admitted to the hospital for quite some time. After she felt better, she started looking for you." The elderly woman heaved a sigh as she could not imagine the pain and struggles Orissa had gone through as a woman. She also could not believe how wicked the woman was. Not only did she snatch the children away from Miss York, she even wanted to finish them off. Tim was struck dumb. What Ethan told Mary was exactly the same story Benjamin had told him. Mary gazed into Tim's eyes and continued, "Your mom was utterly upset and felt it was all her fault when she told me about it. I'm a mother, too, so I could tell she loves you very much. But there was nothing she could do back then because someone sabotaged her. Please don't blame your mom because it's not her fault. I'm glad I've rescued you and raised you. Otherwise, your mom will live in sorrow for the rest of her life. There's no mother in the world who doesn't love their children, Tim, because children are our flesh and blood," the elderly woman added. Tim felt he was about to tear up. "Grandma, your mom loves you very much. You can feel it, can't you?" Mary held him even tighter. Chapter 533. Tim had always felt sorry for himself because he thought his parents had abandoned him. But the truth was, it was all a misunderstanding. The little guy also felt guilty for the way he treated them. "I don't blame Daddy and Mommy anymore," Tim sniffed, with beads of tears caught on his lashes. He nodded in Mary's embrace and whispered, "Miss York is a very nice lady. She loves me very much." Mary responded with a delightful smile. "Yes, I've never come across a woman as perfect as your mommy. She took great care of me and has never complained about how dirty and troublesome I was. If she could treat an outsider with such kindness, I'm sure she loves you with all her heart because you're her precious baby. Even nurses paid to look after the patients are not as meticulous as Miss York." "Miss York is a nice lady." Tim nodded admittedly. Mary stroked the back of his head and gave him a doubtful look. "Miss York, your mom will feel sad if she hears that. You should start calling her mommy." Tim pressed his lips. He still could not bring himself to call Orissa his mommy. Mary decided not to force him as she knew the boy needed some time to process his thoughts. But she believed he would do the right thing. Mary wiped away his tears with her fingers. "Don't cry anymore, okay? Mommy will be upset, too, if she sees you crying." Tim also wiped away the tears and snot on his face. Mary gently pulled his hand to stop him. "Go and get yourself a piece of tissue." Tim sniffled and got down from the bed. When he was about to retrieve tissues from the box on the table, someone gave him a few pieces from behind. Tim tilted his head and blushed when he saw Sean smiling at him. "I didn't hear a word you said." After passing the tissues to Tim, Sean turned around and stepped out of the ward. "I'm going to give Kingsley a call." "Kingsley? Who's Kingsley?" Tim glanced at Sean before wiping the snot and the tears with the tissues he gave. "Come and take a short nap, Tim," Mary said. "No thanks, Grandma. Go ahead and take a rest, okay? I'll keep an eye on your IV drip." Mary reminded the little boy, "Don't run around, okay?" "Okay." Tim nodded. When Sean was about to call Kingsley to kill time, he saw Benjamin walking over with Gavin and the others. "Why are you so early?" They all wanted to come. Benjamin took a sidelong glance at the 5 children, who had just taken a 30-minute nap. Gavin rolled his eyes. "Don't blame us when you yourself wanted to come. We can always come without you." "Yeah," Zachary echoed. He then gestured for his other siblings to go and look for Tim. "I wonder if Mommy and Tim are up." "Tim is awake and is now in Madame Mary's ward. I think your mommy is still asleep," Sean said to the little ones. "Let's go and look for Tim then." All 5 children ran toward the ward. Benjamin reminded them, "Make sure all of you don't disturb Madame Mary." The children entered the ward without giving him a response. "How is Madame Mary's test results?" Benjamin turned to Sean and asked. "We have yet to receive her blood test results from the lab." "How about her other tests?" "Madame Mary has the 3 highs. She's suffering from gynecological inflammation, and her heart and lungs are not functioning well. Oh, she also has kidney stones. We'll need to schedule an appointment with the doctor to have them removed." "Are these conditions serious?" Benjamin frowned upon hearing all the medical issues. "These are not severe problems on a case-by-case basis, but since Madame Mary is suffering from all these conditions all at once, the doctors might have a hard time prescribing the right medicines for her," Sean explained. "Let's start with the most severe problem first then," Benjamin responded in a deep voice. Sean nodded. "It would be much easier for the doctors to customize a treatment for her if there are no issues with her blood." Benjamin looked in the ward's direction and asked, "Is Madame Mary ready to return to Delmore?" "I've given her an injection. She can leave in 2 days when she feels better." All the health problems that had plagued Mary had taken a toll on her general well-being. Even a young person might not be able to endure the pain that she, an elderly woman, was going through. Benjamin nodded and left for the lounge. Chapter 534. Sean looked over. "Are you going to see Mrs. Graham?" Benjamin merely hummed in response without turning his head around. Sean could not help but chuckle. Is he acknowledging it already? When Benjamin entered the lounge, a sleeping Marissa came into view. She was in a deep sleep, and her mouth was wide open. As Marissa rolled over, the blanket fell to the side. Seeing that, Benjamin walked over and placed the blanket over her. Just as he was about to turn around to deal with some work at the side, his clothes were tugged at by Marissa. He cast a gaze downward to look at the woman who was sound asleep. "Don't leave." The gentle voice sounded pitiful. Anyone who heard it would surely feel bad. Benjamin's gaze softened. He sat down and tapped on her nose. "Ah, you look cute only when you're asleep." When she was awake, every word she uttered had the potential to drive him up the wall. Thinking he was her son, Marissa stretched out her arms and hugged him. She wrapped her arms tightly around his waist and even rubbed her face against his body, feeling a sense of blissfulness. Benjamin narrowed his eyes as his gaze darkened. His Adam's apple bobbed as he swallowed hard, trying his best to suppress the reverie in his mind. He then gently leaned beside the bed. "Sweetheart," Marissa murmured. The corner of Benjamin's lips lifted, feeling delighted. Unfortunately, that feeling only lasted for a few seconds. After hearing Marissa's next words, he froze instantly. "Mommy really loves you." He glared at the sleeping woman, not realizing the jealousy that was displayed all over his face. Her words would have sounded better without the word, "Mommy." How dare she take me for her son? Benjamin snorted inwardly. However, when he saw her rubbing her face against himself, his displeasure dissipated, feeling comforted by her actions. He then pulled the blanket over her and started looking through the documents using his phone. Perhaps it was Arissa's snoring that affected his work efficiency. After forcefully reading through one document, he tossed his phone aside and lay down as well. When he brought the children back to the hotel, he barely had any time to take a nap. Benjamin pinched Arissa's nose gently, causing the latter to grumble defensively and turn her head away. Shortly after, she turned her head back and hugged him tightly. Her familiar fragrance entered Benjamin's nostrils, which gave him a calming effect. Not long after, he fell asleep, too. Meanwhile, the children wanted to see if their mother was asleep or not. To their surprise, they saw them hugging each other to sleep. Looks of surprise were displayed on their faces. "I'm going to take a picture as proof." Oliver took out his phone cheekily and took a picture of the scene before him. "It's Mommy who's hugging Mr. Graham," Jessie told her brothers. "Mr. Graham is also hugging Mommy." Jasper stared at the two adults on the bed without blinking. Seeing Arissa was still sleeping, Jessie gestured for his siblings to go out. "Let's go out first. Mommy's still sleeping. We'll come back later." Gavin, too, pulled Tim out of the room. Tim gave Benjamin and Arissa a glance. "Is it weird for Mr. Graham to sleep with Miss York?" Immediately, Gavin, Zachary, Oliver, Jasper, and Jessie looked at him. Tim did not understand why they were so surprised. Nathan's parents sleep on the same bed in the village, too. Mr. Graham and Miss York are our parents. Of course, they should be sleeping together, right? Tim, Mr. Graham and Mommy's relationship aren't very close, Zachary explained while walking out. Mommy didn't know him in the past. She didn't know him even when she gave birth to us. She only came to know him when she came looking for Gavin and you. Tim was dumbfounded when he heard that. If they didn't know each other, then why would they have? He stared at the rest of the children. Jasper cleared his throat, his face turning slightly red. They were set up and made a mistake. That's why we're here. Huh. Tim was puzzled, not sure if he understood it correctly. Nonetheless, Gavin continued pulling him out of the room. Once the 6 children sat on the bench in the passageway, Gavin and the others took turns explaining Arissa's relationship with Benjamin to Tim. Chapter 535. Soon, Arissa woke up. As she opened her eyes, a handsome face came into view. She was stunned. Why is my son suddenly all grown up? Unable to grasp the situation, she blinked a few times. Immediately, she met a pair of dark eyes that caused her to jolt back to her senses. This is not my son. It's obviously Benjamin, but wasn't I hugging my son to sleep? Why has he turned into Benjamin? She exclaimed, "Why are you here?" Benjamin stared intently at her shocked expression. "That's what I want to ask you." Arissa was taken aback. "Ask me." Realizing his arms were wrapped around her waist, she immediately raised her arm to push him. "Let go of me." Benjamin raised a brow, locking his eyes on her with a devilish gaze. "Shouldn't you be the one who should let me go first?" His breath brushed against her face, leaving a ticklish and numbing feeling on her skin. Hearing that, Arissa quickly withdrew her hand and turned around to lie on her back. Her face grew hot. At the same time, Benjamin continued staring at her with an intense gaze. "Why are you sleeping here?" Arissa looked elsewhere, refusing to meet his eyes. Benjamin rested his head on an arm, casting her teasing glances. "You pulled my shirt and made me come up here." Stunned, Arissa turned around to rebuke, "That's impossible." Benjamin arched a brow charmingly. "You even called me sweetheart." His words left Arissa speechless. "I tugged at his shirt and even called him sweetheart. Is he lying to me?" "I don't believe you," Arissa insisted. Looking at the woman who refused to admit it, Benjamin sniggered. "I should have recorded it. That way, I'll be able to play it for you." Arissa eyed him. Did I really call him that? Right then, she recalled having a dream. Maybe I really did take him for my son. I had a dream. Maybe I thought you were Tim, she said. When Benjamin heard her words, his face darkened instantly. So, she really took me for her son because of a dream. Where's Tim? Arissa sat up and looked around the room in search of Tim. He's next door. Benjamin, too, sat up and went into the restroom. After getting some sleep, he felt much more energized. Even his mood had improved. Arissa gave him a glance before getting off the bed. She rubbed her face and went out to look for her children. In the meantime, the 6 children were keeping Mary company by chatting with her. It was a lively atmosphere. Seeing that, Orissa smiled. Just as she was about to return to the lounge to wash her face, the children spotted her. "Mommy, you're awake." Jessie ran faster than anyone, leaping onto Orissa and hugging the latter. Orissa held her up with affection and planted kisses on Jess's face. "When did all of you come here?" "Mommy, we've been here for almost an hour." Jessie grinned as she looked at Orissa, returning the latter's kisses. "Did you get a good rest?" Orissa nodded. "Yes, I've gotten enough rest now." "Mommy." Gavin, Zachary, Oliver, and Jasper approached her. They lifted their heads to look at her with happy expressions. Tim was staring at her from the side as well. Orissa patted the children's heads. "Why did all of you come so soon? How long did you sleep?" "Don't tell me you didn't sleep at all." "We slept, Mommy. We slept for half an hour." Jasper piped up. "All of us slept, but Mr. Graham didn't." Oliver grinned. Orissa flashed them a faint smile. No wonder Benjamin came here to sleep. After scanning the children, she smiled at Tim, asking, "Tim, how long was your afternoon nap?" "I slept for half an hour, too," Tim replied softly. Orissa smiled in response, bending over to place Jessie down. She went over to talk to Mary before saying to the children, "Don't disturb Madam Mary, okay? I'll go freshen up and come back in a while." "Got it, Mommy." Gavin and Zachary replied in unison. When Orissa arrived at the lounge, Benjamin had stepped out of the restroom and was sitting on the couch, looking at something. "Go get washed and have some food," he said. She turned around and caught sight of some food for tea time on the coffee table. "Okay," she responded. Before leaving for the restroom, she called out, "Go get the children to come over and have some." Benjamin did not respond. Chapter 536. Not long after, Orissa finished washing up and exited the restroom. Seeing the children were not around, she glanced at Benjamin. "You didn't tell Gavin and the others to come over." Benjamin cast a glance at her, lifted his cup and took a sip of coffee. "No." Orissa shot the elegant-looking man a glare, her lips twitching. She then turned around, wanting to go get the children. When she arrived at the door, she retreated, took some food for Mary, and left for the room next door. "Sweethearts, go to the lounge next door to have some food. Your daddy is there." She beckoned for the children to go over. Then, she sat beside Mary's bed and said, "Here. Have some, Madam Mary." "Oh, I'm not hungry." "You can have it." Mary lay in the bed, as she was not done with her injections. "Please have some. Your injections take up energy fast," Orissa coaxed Mary. "Put it aside first. I want to go to the restroom." Hearing that, Orissa quickly helped Mary up. Tim came over to help as well. "Be careful, Grandma." "Okay." Mary stood up, stumbling slightly. After helping her to sit in the wheelchair, Orissa brought the IV drip over. She held it with one hand, while using the other to push Mary to the restroom. "Sweetheart, hurry up and go over to have something to eat. I can handle this on my own." She turned around and spoke to Tim, who stared at her before saying softly, "I want to wait for Grandma to come out first." Orissa smiled, not bothering to make him leave anymore. "I'll just bring him over later." She helped Mary into the restroom, while Tim helped to shut the door. "It's okay, Issa, I can do it on my own. You can go out." Mary stood up carefully, and Orissa helped her to sit on the toilet bowl. "I'll wait for you," said the latter. Mary turned to her. "I might need to take a dump. It's better if you go out." Orissa nodded and reminded Mary, "Watch out for the IV drip. Don't raise your arm too high up. Call for me when you're done, okay?" "Okay. Go out now, quickly," Mary urged gently. When Orissa stepped out of the restroom, she saw Tim still standing in front of the door. She pulled him aside and asked, "Why didn't you sleep for a little longer?" "I did and I'm awake now." Tim studied her, noticing her eyes were slightly puffed. After some time, he said, "Miss York, I'll get you a warm towel for your eyes." "Huh?" Orissa gave him a puzzled look. Tim tapped his eyelid. "Yours eyes are puffed up." Stunned, Orissa took out her phone to look at herself. True enough, her eyelids were indeed swollen. No wonder I kept getting the feeling that something was blocking my view. What's wrong with my eyelids? Why do I look like I've been crying? Ha ha, maybe I drank too much water, Orissa said, feeling embarrassed. Tim pursed his lips. He did not dare to tell her that was caused by crying. Orissa patted his head. Go on and have something to eat. Daddy and the others are in the room next door. Right then, Gavin dashed into the room. Mommy, Daddy is calling for you and Tim to go over and eat. Okay, I'll be over in a while. Bring Tim over first. Orissa gave Tim a gentle push. Gavin went over and tugged at Tim. Let's go and eat. If not, the others are going to finish the food. As Tim was being pulled out, he said, Grandma. We'll come over and keep Grandma company later. Mommy is here to keep her company now, isn't she? Gavin pulled Tim out of the room. Meanwhile, Orissa continued waiting for Mary in the ward. When Orissa heard the sound of flushing in the restroom, she stood up and went to the door. Mary, are you done? Not yet. Hearing that, Orissa went to arrange the bedsheets and tidy up the area. When the nurse entered and saw what Orissa was doing, the former quickly stepped forward to take over the job. Mrs. Graham, let me do it. Orissa rubbed her nose. How did Ethan introduce me to the nurses? Why are they also calling me Mrs. Graham now? Orissa, a man's voice could be heard shouting by the door. Huh, she turned to look over, only to make eye contact with Benjamin's frustrated gaze. Come here, he said. Dumbfounded, Orissa walked over. What is it? Chapter 537. Go over there and eat with the children. Why are you dawdling for? Benjamin asked. He tugged at her arm, but she grabbed him. I want to wait until Madam Mary comes out. Why are you in such a rush? You can just eat with the children. Just let the nurses take care of her. Benjamin turned around to instruct the nurses to take care of Mary before pulling Orissa out of the room. Orissa side-eyed his handsome face. How aggressive. He just has to go his own way. Are you worried I'm hungry? She asked. Benjamin shot her a glance. The children can't eat in peace when you're not around. They're all waiting for you. Orissa could not believe his words. When she entered the lounge, she saw the 6 children sitting in the room, taking tiny bites out of the food. Even the glutton, Jessie, was licking her food. It was an amusing scene. Sweethearts, why are you eating like this? Orissa asked. Mommy, you're finally here. We've been waiting for you. Come and eat. Jessie patted the seat beside her, beckoning Orissa to sit there. Orissa smiled and walked over, sitting in between the children. Mommy, have this. Gavin gave her an egg tart. It was still warm. Orissa smiled and hummed in response. After taking a bite, she exclaimed, It's delicious. Sweethearts, try this, quick. It's best eaten when it's warm. Okay, the children answered, and they started digging in. Orissa gazed at them. When she saw Tim looking reluctant to eat, she prompted, Eat up, Tim. There's still some more. Tim looked at her and nodded. He found the pastry extremely delicious and fragrant. Tim, here's another egg tart for you. Jasper gave Tim another while taking one for himself. The former finished it with just a few bites. It's really yummy, Mommy. How many can each person have? Orissa cast Jasper a glance. Count it. Just make sure you don't eat it all. Jasper stuck his tongue out mischievously. Orissa, too, took another one. Before Tim could even finish one, she had already eaten 2. Sweethearts, eat faster. If not, I'm going to finish it all. She urged. Oliver grinned. Mommy, you were telling that to Jasper earlier. And now, you're eating the most. Orissa raised her brow. My stomach is bigger than yours. Isn't it normal for me to eat more? Gavin chuckled. Even Tim's lips quirked into a smile. Zachary shot her a disdainful look. Mommy, you're the most thick-skinned person. Orissa gave him a side eye. I'd be starved to death if I wasn't thick-skinned. Zachary merely smiled, feeling at a loss for words. Meanwhile, Benjamin scanned the crowd of Orissa and the 6 children before taking a seat opposite them. It was only at that moment that she realized there was another adult, which gave her a startle. Seeing the man was only drinking coffee without having any food, she said, Benjamin, you can't just drink coffee without eating anything. It's bad for the stomach. Especially when Benjamin only drank coffee without sugar and milk. It was pure, bitter coffee. There's no way I could drink that. Benjamin glanced at her. Go ahead and eat first. Orissa was surprised, and she gave the food on the coffee table a glance. There's still a lot of food. Is he worried there won't be enough for me and the children? She leaned over and pushed the plate of food toward him. It tastes better if we eat together. A glint flashed across Benjamin's eyes. Okay. He accepted the food and started eating slowly. He was extremely handsome. Thus, even the sight of him eating was pleasing to the eye. Orissa's gaze trembled slightly. When Benjamin swept his gaze over her, she quickly retracted hers and picked up something to eat. Perhaps it was the guilt of stealing glances at him that made her choke accidentally. She coughed violently, causing Benjamin to frown and push the cup of coffee to her lips. Without realizing it, Orissa took a few sips and came to her senses only after a few seconds. Ah, it's so bitter. Benjamin patted her back. That's what happens if you don't pay attention while eating. The warmth in Orissa's heart faded the second she heard his words. She cast him a glare. Don't speak as if you've never choked before. It's all his fault. Why is he so handsome? I got distracted because he made me take a few more glances at him. Chapter 538. How dare you talk back? Benjamin felt strange to be faced with Orissa's resentful gaze. He lifted his hand and flicked her forehead, warning, don't be a bad influence on the kids. Orissa opened her mouth to say something, but she could only scold him in her heart. What's his problem? It's his picky behavior that's going to be a bad influence on the kids. When Benjamin saw the change in her expression, he chuckled inwardly. Are you scolding me? Oh, I wouldn't dare to, Orissa replied with a snort. Really? Benjamin raised his eyebrow devilishly, exuding an aura of dominance. Orissa was speechless. At the same time, the 6 children watched them without blinking. Jasper grinned mischievously, cheering for Orissa. Mommy, don't be a pushover. I'll back you. Orissa's lips twitched, and she turned to glare at him. I'm not. I'm being smart by adapting to the situation. Jasper snickered, but he was criticized by Benjamin. Hey, don't talk like that to your mother. Benjamin frowned. From whom did he learn to speak like that? Jasper pouted. Why are you scolding him? Orissa glared at Benjamin. Why is he so strict with his son? Benjamin's handsome face darkened, and he chastised, how could he say such things to you? Why not? Orissa was rendered speechless. Benjamin knitted his brows. He had the urge to teach her a lesson at that moment. You're being fierce to mommy again. Gavin rolled his eyes at Benjamin. Benjamin frowned and shot him a glance before turning to look at Jasper. Who taught you those words? When Orissa heard Benjamin's question, she finally understood what he was angry at. Her confidence faded. She glanced at the stern-looking man and then at her son. Hearing that, Jasper cowered. If it was not because of fear being a bad influence on them, Orissa would have wanted to tease the boy for being more cowardly than her. I learned it from surfing the internet, Jasper answered. He picked it up, thinking it was cool. Benjamin frowned harder and growled, don't watch too much nonsense on the internet in the future. Orissa hinted to Jasper to nod, to which the latter did immediately. Mr. Graham, I rarely surf the internet. It's just that I saw many people saying such things. Even Mr. Hinton said it. That's why I did the same. Suddenly, Benjamin cast Orissa a stern gaze, and she grinned sheepishly. Why are you glaring at me for? Don't all men speak like that? She really did not think it was that serious. At least he wasn't cursing. Have I ever said that to you? Benjamin asked suddenly. Orissa blinked, staring at the grim-looking Benjamin. She tried to repeat Jasper's words in her mind, and her heart sank. The meaning was totally different. Her cheeks flushed instantly, and she turned away, not daring to meet Benjamin's eyes. Putting on a stern face, she said to Jasper, don't say such things in the future. All of you must not learn such words, okay? Jasper looked at her and nodded. Got it, Mommy. Got it, Mommy. The other children replied in unison. Let's eat. Orissa bent forward and served the children with food before continuing to stuff herself. She did not even bother looking at Benjamin. Tim was a curious child. He leaned toward Zachary and asked softly, "What's the meaning of surfing the internet? Is it some kind of fishing net? Why do I not understand the meaning?" Zachary felt bad for him and explained softly, "Have you seen a computer before?" Tim shook his head, saying he was not sure. Every child in the village said his brother had one, but he had never seen it. "Does it look like a television?" Zachary paused for a while and nodded. "Something like that, but it has different functions. Nowadays, smartphones have similar functions as a computer, that is, they can connect to a signal. It lets someone read the news, novels, watch movies, search for information, play games, and so much more." Chapter 539. Zachary pulled out his phone and showed it to Tim. "This is what surfing the internet means, using the phone or a computer to do such things." "Oh," Tim nodded, finally understanding the meaning. Though their voices were soft, Orissa heard everything, and it left an ache in her heart. They lived in the same world, yet Tim looked as though he had been living in another. It was as if he was living in a world that existed a couple of decades back. He had never seen anything and had been living a poor life. She lowered her head, shoving food into her mouth robotically as her heart ached terribly. Even her vision started to blur. When the children found out Tim had not seen such devices, they explained it enthusiastically to him. They even taught him how to use a phone. Meanwhile, Benjamin fixed his gaze on Orissa when he saw her behaving oddly. "Orissa, Orissa." The 6 children turned to look over. Sensing the movements, Orissa quickly wiped the corner of her eyes and lifted his head to look Benjamin swiftly in the eye. Right then, he stood up. "Follow me." Realizing his tone was a little forceful, he spoke in a gentler tone. "Please come out for a while. Make sure you guys eat your food." His final sentence was a reminder for the kids. Orissa was a little dejected, and it was not appropriate to scare the children. Hearing that, Orissa rose to her feet to exit the lounge. "Mommy, what's wrong?" Gavin cast her a worried look. "It's nothing." Orissa smiled and followed Benjamin out. The 6 children stared at them while Jasper scolded himself. "Did Mommy cry because of me?" Jessie pursed her lips. If she were to cry because of that, she would have cried long ago. She must have thought of something sad. Zachary glanced at his silly siblings, and a glint flashed past his eyes. "Hurry up and eat. We can just ask Mommy later." Jasper and Jessie looked at him and turned to the door. Oliver and Tim were confused. "Why did Mommy cry?" Gavin frowned and fixed his eyes on the outside. "I'm going to take a look. You guys continue eating." After giving them the instructions, he crept over and hid behind the door. Zachary could not help but chuckle at his brother's actions. Even Gavin's learning all the bad habits. He knows how to eavesdrop now. "Tim, let's eat." Zachary called out to Tim warmly and handed him some food. Meanwhile, Orissa almost bumped into Benjamin outside. Noticing that, he helped her up. Orissa felt slightly embarrassed. "Sorry." When Benjamin noticed she was feeling down, he could not bring himself to scold her. "Are you sad?" A gentle voice rang in the air, leaving Orissa stunned and wondering if she had misheard it. She lifted her head to look at Benjamin, who raised his brow. "Why are you crying if you're not sad?" She returned to her senses, feeling embarrassed. "Of course, I'm sad. I feel bad for my son." Benjamin sighed and patted her head. When Orissa felt his concern, her heart raced. It's normal for him to not be exposed to such things in the village. You'll just have to make sure to teach him slowly in the future. Orissa nodded. Of course, she knew that. She just could not help but feel bad for her child. "Do you need me to lend you a shoulder to cry on?" Benjamin lifted her chin. Stunned, Orissa swatted his hand away and grumbled, "It's fine." Benjamin snickered upon seeing her reddened face. His reaction only made her blush even more. "Go in and eat with them. I'm going to look for Sean," Benjamin informed her and turned around to leave. Orissa watched him as he left. Did Benjamin call me out to comfort me? A heartwarming feeling filled her. Seeing that Orissa was about to return to the lounge, Gavin quickly ran back in with a smile on his face. "Not bad. At least Daddy did something right." "What did you hear?" Zachary and the others asked upon seeing Gavin's return. Gavin placed a finger in front of his mouth and shushed them. In the next second, Orissa entered the lounge. Meanwhile, Zachary felt calmer when he saw that Gavin's mood had lifted. "Mommy, why did Mr. Graham ask you to go out? What did he say?" he asked Orissa while looking at her without blinking. Chapter 540. Orissa stroked his head as she sat down. "He said that he has gone to see Mr. Bailey." Zachary nodded. Oliver asked, "Mommy, what happened to you just now? Did you think of something sad?" He noticed Orissa wiping the tears off her eyes. Orissa cleared her throat awkwardly. "I was just touched by how delicious the food was." The 6 children were stumped. Without explaining any further, Orissa quickly finished her food and went to Mary's ward to accompany her. Meanwhile, the children continued to finish their snacks in the break room. Tim suddenly asked in a low voice, "Is Miss York reacting that way because of me?" She was also crying when she was asleep. Gavin was stunned by how sensitive Tim was and quickly comforted him, "Don't overthink it. It might well be because of something else." "That's right. It might not necessarily be because of you," Zachary reassured him too. When the other 3 children saw Tim lowering his head, they, too, consoled him immediately. "Tim, do you feel pressured? Didn't Mommy say just now that it was because of the delicious food?" "Don't lie to me. Miss York was crying in her sleep, for she feels that she has failed me," Tim explained. Gavin and the others were shocked. Mommy was crying in her sleep. When he saw the surprised and sympathetic looks on their faces, Tim nodded his head. As if he had done something wrong, he tucked his head in and explained apologetically, "I did comfort her, but she didn't hear me because she was in deep sleep. She did stop after crying for a long while." When Tim's siblings saw how sorry he was and that he was blaming himself, their hearts went out to him. Gavin tousled his hair. "Tim, Mommy just felt bad for your sake. She feels that way because of her love for you. In fact, she reacted the exact same way when she first found me. She didn't dare speak loudly and felt that she had let me down. All she felt like doing was treat me better. Even then, she would cry while we weren't looking." Tim widened his eyes and asked in surprise, "She was like that with you too?" "That's right." After a brief hesitation, Gavin continued, "Back then, I was even abused by that wicked lady. When Mommy found out, her heart ached so much that she shed tears over it." Upon hearing Gavin's words, Tim hid his hands, for he didn't want Orissa to see scars and feel sad over them. As Mommy blames herself for losing us, she can't help but feel that she has let us down. Therefore, you shouldn't feel any pressure from her response, as that's a testament to how much she loves us. Nodding in agreement, Zachary added, "Tim, Mommy loves us a lot and has never forgotten to look for both of you. When she took us overseas back in the day, she was grievously injured. Also, after she gave birth to us, she didn't have the opportunity to recover properly, causing more damage to her health. In fact, we largely spent the first few years of our lives in the hospital. It would either be her or one of us that needs to be warded. Due to how taxing it was for her to care for us, she didn't manage to come back and find you so soon. Nevertheless, she had instructed Mr. Hinton to search for you in secret. She didn't tell us that we still had 2 more brothers. Instead, she would always cry alone and shoulder the pain alone. Back then, we assumed that she was devastated over being dumped. It was only now that we realize it was because of both of you." When Gavin and Tim heard the story, both of them could feel their heartache. It turns out that Mommy didn't forget us at all. Also, she has really been through a lot. Tim asked in concern, "In that case, are all of you feeling better already?" All of us are fine. But due to Mommy suffering from the side effects of her sickness, she can't get too emotional." Zachary let out a sigh. This time, Mommy even fainted a couple of times from sad news. "Tim, stop blaming yourself or Mommy, all right? It was a villain who separated us. Or else, Mommy wouldn't be suffering from the side effects still." "I don't blame her at all," Danny murmured. Zachary's eyes lit up, while the rest of the children were delighted by what they heard. "Really,